All right, hello class. How's everybody doing? This is the moment you've been waiting for, the Mr. Haptics presentation. I know it got delayed a couple times, but here it is. So let's dive into it. Today I'm going to talk about haptic feedback. So what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation, I'm going to start with embodiment, and then go into why you should care, and then finish off by explaining how you can implement it into your game. So first, what is embodiment? Embodiment is the sense that a player has when they're experiencing this like immersive experience, where embodiment is basically the amount that they feel like they're controlling the character in their environment or interacting with the environment itself. So there's a few important factors that change like the amount of embodiment that players feel. One of them is the perception of the character as a self or your appearance. So does the character feel like they own this body? Does it feel like they are playing as the character they are playing? Does it feel like their hands and other things in the world line up with where they are in the real world and to the relationship to themselves? Then there's motor controls and senses and functionality. Motor controls are pretty easy in VR. You don't really have to think about it. Or I'm sorry, I meant the senses are pretty easy in VR. You don't really have to think about it because you just see and hear things automatically. Motor controls are very important though, making sure that things like move the right way and that you are interacting with things properly that feels functional. So for example, in Super Hot, you can move really slow to make time move slow and it feels very immersive and functional. Or if you're using like a gun, you're gonna pull the trigger on the controller to use it. And the last thing here is the response to stimuli / feedback. So in traditional games, this is done heavily through visual effects and sound effects. Like over here on the right, you see the character getting smashed by this giant monster and then they're being knocked back as a result. And in the picture on the left, Super Smash Ultimate, when you're hitting this final attack that is surely going to kill the character, it does this super awesome, impactful, suspenseful effect to make it feel like it's a really key pivotal moment. All of these things also apply in VR, but the one thing that VR has that's different is haptic feedback. So why should you care? Embodiment and haptic feedback with it help increase the sense of immersion in VR, and you want your players to be immersed in VR to have a good experience. The other reason though is that it's very easy to implement and it's impactful. So here's the first way you can implement it into your project, and this is just using the XR controller. So that just shows you that's the XR direct interactive component, but over here on the right is where it's important, where you can define these haptic events. By clicking a checkbox, you can define a haptic event and then give it the intensity and the duration. Now, what these are going to do is these are events for when you're interacting with interactable objects, such as like grab interactables. So when you pick something up, the hover is when you go into it, but when you select, and you can also select exit to say when you like throw something. So those will just automatically trigger these haptic events anytime you do some of that. But what if you want to do something that's outside of just grabbing the object that you are using? Well, you're going to have to go through code. So I'm going to provide you guys with a base VR Haptics Manager script that I made. Make as many changes as you want to it. It's really going to be very like small functionality. But here's an example of one of the functions inside of it. So the second function, right, or the line inside of it, controller.send haptic impulse, this is how you actually interact with the XR direct interactor or an XR based controller to send in haptic feedback. This is just kind of a helper function to help you do it a little bit easier. And then if you need to process anything while you're doing this, you can do that in this space. You'll see when I get it to you, there's a few other versions of this function that let you put in a interactable object, or you can define like left or right controller, something like that. Here's a few examples of how I used it in some of my projects. The first one is actually from Monarch Simulator when I was creating a lever. So you grab the lever and then there's these little like visualizer balls that you click. Like when you're pulling the lever back, it clicks each ball, and when you get to the biggest ball, it actually like activates the trap door. So what you're doing here is you're getting the XR direct interactor component from the interactable object. It's a really janky way of doing it, but that is the best way I have found to do it. I don't know why they don't have a better way to do it, but that's pretty much how you can do that. So the way I was applying it is on a trigger enter, when you hit one of those balls with the lever handle, it would say to send this haptic impulse to anything, or to the first interactor that was selecting that ball. The second one is just a very like baseline, like, hey, something happens, let's do some haptics in both controllers. So let's say, for example, your game starts and you just want to have a little bit of shake to it. You can just tell it, hey, VR Haptics Manager, send the haptic impulse to both controllers. It's that easy. So now we're going to get into when and where. When and where do you want to implement haptics into your game or project? Everywhere. Kind of. So you really want to use it as much as you can within reason. You want to use haptics whenever the player is doing something impactful within the game or environment, such as picking up an object, or throwing an object, or firing a gun. You want to have haptics to make that feel impactful, like you're actually doing something in the game. Or you want to use it when something impactful is happening in the game that the player should know about. For example, an earthquake, or a tornado, or a cinematic event where an enemy jumps really high in the air and then lands and slams on the ground, and you want to feel the impactful shake in your controllers. But make sure you avoid to have too much feedback, because if your controllers are constantly buzzing the entire time, it's going to get very annoying and frustrating, and your players are not going to like it. So play around with the amplitude and the duration of your haptics to create different events. You want to make sure that more important events have stronger or longer lasting haptic impulses than other events. So say if you're using your UI and you're looking at buttons or clicking buttons, you want the looking at buttons to be not as intense as when you're actually clicking the button. Same thing goes for example, in my recent project, you had a blaster. When you shoot it, it does like a nice, juicy, impactful buzz. But then when it's out of ammo, it does a slight, soft little click. And just doing that lets the player know that, hey, they're out of bullets. And then if you're looking for inspiration, check out Wii controllers, Xbox controllers, and PlayStation controllers, and some of the games that you can play with them. Recently, I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty, and they have an insane amount of like haptic events, just so from like sliding, dolphin diving, shooting, running into walls apparently triggers haptics too. It's kind of crazy. So those are just some cool things you can look at for inspiration on where and when and what you can do with haptic feedback. And that concludes the presentation. Any questions?
So for stuff like Xbox and PlayStation controllers, how do you go about setting up haptics for those? Because I'm assuming it's not like interactable interactors.
So this I meant more like as inspiration
Okay.
to apply to your game. So I was implying like go out and play Xbox games using an Xbox controller and then see like where and when the controller starts to vibrate.
Pretty sure there's Unity calls for doing that.
Okay.
Those other games, they were pretty easy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Must have done a pretty decent job then.
Something else to think about along with this, because I think this is awesome, the more immersion. Something else you can do, like we used to do a lot of Alienware, and they've got their stuff there, and computers with color. That's another way to create some immersion, is interfacing with certain SDKs out there that also change color. Like TVs are actually doing that now as another way to create a sense of immersion and kind of feeling like you're there. So having your keyboard or the lights on your laptop even change color, like when you're getting hit versus when something good happens. Those are all things that just kind of add a little hint of something to what's going on and give you more feedback, which is, I think, pretty awesome and goes right along with what you're talking about. So,
Sure is.
Anybody else? Awesome. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.